So this week's Parsha is Parshat Behar, which opens up with a mitzvah of counting that feels almost like an echo or reminiscent of last week's Parsha and Parshat Emor. And I was thinking about maybe like the ways we talk about counting time in secular culture, and maybe other people have ideas too, but things that I've said or I've heard said, especially young parents, people say things like the days drag on, but the years fly by, right? I think Nechama said that to me in shul last Shabbat. We say things like, instead of counting the moments, make the moments count. Time flies when you're having fun, right? I'm sure people here can think of more of them, but it seems like as a society, both Jewish and secular, that we think a lot about how to measure and reflect on our time. In my previous life, I was someone who loved to measure things. I, not as a mathematician, but I used to do assessment and benchmarking for Jewish nonprofits. And so the idea of thinking about what it looks like to measure and count time in the Jewish calendar was really interesting to me. So I wanted to share my screen and to think. Hopefully I'm not already doing that. Let's see, here we go. Perfect. So to think about how we count both in Parshat Emor and Parshat Behar, and how they sort of come together or don't come together, and what they teach us about counting in general and marking time sort of thoughtfully and intentionally. So this week's Parshat Behar, is the first source on the page here, right? And it says, V'safarta lecha sheva shabbatot shanim sheva shanim sheva pa'amayim v'hayu lecha yemei sheva shabbatot hashanim tesha v'arba'im shana. And I read it in Hebrew because we're going to hear the same sort of rhythm when we read the next one, right? But you count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years, which will end in the year of the Yovel, the Jubilee year. Right, so here we're talking about counting Shemitah cycles, right? So we learned about Shemitah a little earlier this year. Shemitah is the 7th year in which we let the land rest. But after 7 Shemitah cycles, so 49 years, you end with a Yovel year. And the Yovel year frees slaves. It releases you from monetary payments, which we spoke about in the wintertime. And it's a much bigger deal in many ways. So that it just feels, like I said, sort of like an echo or maybe reminiscent of last week's Parsha, where in Emor we read about counting the Omer, right? And here we see Usafartam lachem mimacharat hashabat, where whenever that is, mihayom haviechem et haomer hatnufa sheva shabbatot mimot tihiana, right? So you should have sheva shabbatot. Again, we sort of see that language of 7 weeks. And so you count until the day after the 7th week. So we're not going to end at day 49 the same way we do up here, but 50 days, 49 days plus the next day, when you bring your mincha chadasha, your new offering of grain to the Lord. So again, I think the question is, how does counting weeks and counting years interact or not interact? It seems like they're set up very similarly, perhaps to call our attention to them. So one of the first things that jumps out to many is that the command is directed in the singular in our parsha, that you should count 7 weeks. And when we're talking about the Omer, this is something everyone does, like in their own house or during Mariv at shul, wherever you are when you count the Omer. It's a communal obligation on each individual person, v'safartam lachem, right? That all of you should count those days. And so the Chizkuni, one of the traditional commentaries, in a sort of longer, my computer is thinking slowly, there we go, longer comment about why some things have brachot and some don't, talks about the fact that the singular person that is being addressed in the Yovel commandment is the Beit Din. It's not each person, and it's not like, whichever person, one person, it's an entity, perhaps, is how you could think about it. And I think that that is a very interesting idea, right? And there are probably lots of reasons that we say like an organization should count 49 years, but each person should count 49 days. I'm happy to, if people want to brainstorm, or I can list a few that sort of came to mind. Right, I think there's a technical piece to it. The Beit Din is in charge of announcing the Yovel, the 49th year. So of course they should count the years up to it. I think there's probably a logistical concern, right? If you move away in the middle of the 49 count, what happens to the Yovel year, or people die, people get sick, priorities change, people struggle with memory, right? Like only an institution can hold on to such a long vision in a I think even just a purely logistical fashion. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, has a beautiful essay. I link to it here. I definitely encourage people to read the whole thing. It's called Thinking Long, or Think Long, about this week's Parsha. And this is a very, very brief excerpt here, but I just think he was such a beautiful writer that I wanted to put some of his words here. What Rabbi Sachs is suggesting is that there's like an ideological dimension to counting in the singular. And that it teaches us something about what leadership looks like in general, right? So Rabbi Sachs is saying, you count the 49 days, you, the Amcha, the people, right? What are we telling our leaders when we tell them to count 49-year cycles? And so he says, implicit here is an important principle of leadership. As individuals, we count the days, but as leaders, we must count the years. As private persons, we can think about tomorrow, but in our role as leaders, we must think long-term, focusing our eyes far on the far horizon, right? That it's hard for people. It's not just a logistical thing, but it's an ideological thing. It's hard for people to do this. And he noted here in this way that I just thought was cool, right? He talks about his team, that when he served as the chief rabbi of England, he had a team, because leadership must always be a team enterprise. And he would ask, how will this affect the Jewish community 25 years from now? And in the longer article, you can see there are many examples of Jewish leaders whose forward thinking has shaped the way we practice Judaism today. My favorite one that he brings up is the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. During the siege on Jerusalem, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai famously asks Vespasian, the Roman general, to give me Yavna and its sages, Tainli Yavna v'chachameha, which ensures a spiritual and intellectual leadership that lasts, creates the Gemara and lasts through to this day. And I think that if we think about that time, right, the walls of Jerusalem are burning, people are starving, and he doesn't ask for extra medical supplies or asylum, right, or whatever the thing might be that would help him fix the immediate needs of the people, but he asks for something that guarantees that the next generation of Jews will flourish, right? Set up a place for our leadership to regroup and rethink and plan for the next 49 years or 25 years or whatever that thing is, right? And so the task of for the leaders, the leadership challenge of Behar is to count the years, not the days, to keep faith with the past, but your eyes firmly fixed on the future. And I think that is, it is certainly a problem for individuals, and it's also a problem for leadership, right? And so Rabbi Sachs is saying maybe the parallel here with the Sefartam Lachem of the Omer is to say, just like we're intentional about counting the days, the leadership is being encouraged and implored to also think about the years. Because thinking long-term is the way that you ensure a Jewish future. And then I must admit, before we move on to the next source, that I read a beautiful article by Rabbi Mark Angel, a Sephardi rabbi who lives in New York, and I could not find it again when I tried to look for it to bring like an excerpt up from it. But he talks about a spiritual component to being in the present versus looking to the future. And Rabbi Sachs, I think, is saying is like, let's not have each person worry about the long-term vision. Rabbi Angel is saying, no, everyone should. It's really hard. So the Torah doesn't demand it of us, but it's like a religious practice to sort of think in that forward way. And he talks about how in today's world, there's this culture of like instant gratification, right? We expect everything to come within 49 days, if not sooner. And so that there's something to pushing ourselves to think about the long-term growth of ourselves, which also makes it, which helps us, think about our own long-term growth and development as well. And we look to our leaders to help us keep that focus, but that we shouldn't like let ourselves off the hook just because the Torah doesn't demand it of us. So at this moment, right, looking at the sources, looking at Rabbi Sachs's way of thinking about this time, I think that it seems like the statement of like the days drag on and the years fly by is true, right? That if we're not intentional enough about our counting and our planning, that the years will go by too quickly, and then we look back and like we didn't shape them in the way that we wanted to, and that's okay. It's not always bad, right? Like your babies will grow into beautiful children, you'll get the degrees that you wanted, you'll hopefully it doesn't mean bad things will happen, but there's like a lack of intentionality. And so I think from there the question is, how do we get to that intentional space? But I can pause if anyone has thoughts, questions. Okay. So I think the question is both like, how do we get there as a community and how do we get there as individual people? And this is where I think the echo back to the Omer is especially important. The Omer happens to be one of my favorite mitzvot. I always try to find a way to talk about it during the year because I like things that are regular, like I like schedule, right? So I like that idea of like building that time in. And after Shavuos, I always feel like that empty moment, in the evening here, right before you go to bed, maybe, right? Where I'm like, oh, count the Omer. Oh, there is no more Omer, I like the idea of like little things building to this big mitzvah, right? Like every day we do a little part of this bigger mitzvah. And so I think there's something really beautiful about it. And we see that you can develop a practice of mindfulness around counting the Omer that maybe can extend into our whole lives. And Rabbi Riskin, that we'll look at briefly here in a moment, he spends time comparing the two countings together. And so if the 49th day, or sort of when we reach the end of the Omer, is Shavuot, when we reach the end in our week's Parsha, it's the Yovel. And so Rabbi Riskin is saying, what are the similarities between a Yovel year and between Shavuot, right? Well, so the Yovel year is when we free our slaves, our properties are redeemed. So Shavuot must be about redemption and freedom. And you might say, yeah, like you must have read that wrong. Or Rabbi Riskin, you must be confused. Pesach is our freedom holiday, right? Shavuos is not our Zman Cherutenu, it's our Zman Toratenu. It's not what we typically associate with freedom. And I think that part of that, right, is that thing that Rabbi Angel is talking about, that we want the instant gratification. We were freed from Egypt, and so we are free. But in actuality, we know and we see through the Jews' like long 40-year stretch in the desert, right, that it takes a lot of time to free yourself from slave mentality, to change the way you do things. And that Rabbi Riskin is arguing that the Omer period is where we go from like a momentary freedom to a lasting freedom. And that if we can really make those 49 days count in being intentional, that you get to something much longer lasting. I think I read somewhere that like if you do something for 30 days, right, like it becomes habit. Okay, good. Elizabeth is nodding, so maybe that's right. Right, like if you can work out every day or have your mindfulness practice or eat broccoli or whatever the thing is, that like that, it just becomes habit after that. So similar idea, 49 instead of 30, but right, that we can see that transformation. And Rabbi Riskin, and again, it's a beautiful essay, and I linked to the whole piece here about this week's Parsha, but he talks about the sort of the different goals, and he cites the custom that is brought by Rabbi Soloveitchik about how you count the Omer. So when you count the days of the Omer, right, when you say like Hayom Yom Echad Ba Omer is, I think it's sort of a standardized way. Some people say Hayom Yom Echad La Omer. And so Rabbi Riskin articulates the distinction that he learned from his teacher, from Rabbi Soloveitchik, that counting using the word La Omer is towards the Omer. That's that like forward thinking piece, right? I'm counting one day in my process towards redemption, towards freedom, towards whatever the thing is. By contrast, using the expression Ba Omer is sort of within the Omer. That's about the day-to-day counting. So La Omer is almost like this week's Parsha's goals, and Ba Omer is last week's Parsha's goals, and that they have to work together in some way, right? And so one must understand the importance of the goal La Omer and properly utilize every single day of the period of preparation Ba Omer, right? That to get to La Omer, you have to use the days of the Omer very intentionally. Making each day count is crucial. This is the preparation which will define the quality of the goal and which gives it the festival its name, Shavuot. And Rabbi Riskin talks about how you can even see it in the Omer offering, right? The Omer offering is barley. And when you first leave Egypt, the barley is like not even fit for animals. And then over 49 days, the barley grows and it becomes like a grain that is useful, and you can make it into a bread that you then bring as part of your bikurim on Shavuot, right? And so it's almost like we sort of bake ourselves, we rise ourselves from animal feed to bread over 49 days. Sort of similar, I think we talked before Pesach about how matzah is, right, like the in-process version of yourself, but Shavuot, we bring a chametz offering. It's very rare to bring a korban that is made of chametz, but that's like our puffed up selves, right? We spent 49 days puffing ourselves up into this really important thing. And there's like a place for being, in process. And there's a place for saying like, look, I finished this important unit of time. And so we see that transformation physically there. And I would be remiss if my mother ever listens to this recording. My mother is a therapist, and she talks a lot about mindfulness. And she talks about how mindfulness is an awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. I don't know if that's like an actual definition, but that is like what she always taught us. Right. And that, to me, that is the Omer counting, right? Is that each day you're like taking a moment to say, I'm paying attention to this day. I'm counting this day as like a unit in time over 49 days. And I want to be present in that moment. I'm taking that pause to say a bracha, right? Like you can't sort of just say the Omer on the run. You actually have to stop and like be thoughtful and mindful. And many people use the Sfirot, the 7 characteristics of the divine, to guide us through that practice. And Chabad has an excellent resource for that. I don't use it every day, but I found today's for us. So this week, so there are seven attributes, right? And each week has an attribute, and then each day cycles through those 7. So you'll have, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, and then 2 and 1, 2 and 2, 2 and 3. So today, so we're in the 4th week. So the 4th week is the week of Netzach. Every day has a Netzach. And then we're also today, day 4, I think, of the week. Yeah, I think that's right. Is the characteristic of Hod, of humility. And so these are from the Chabad website. I just pulled them right off. I try to remember to go there. They have a whole app for next year, whoever wants one. It says, examine the strength and endurance of your humility. Does my humility withstand challenges? Am I firm in my positions, or do I waffle in the name of humility? I think already the questions made me sort of take a step back to say like, oh, I thought like being humble is always good, right? And here they're saying like, don't let your humility guide you to do the wrong thing almost. Humility and modesty should not cause one to feel weak and insecure. Netzach of Hod underscores the fact that true humility does not make you into a doormat for others to step on. On the contrary, humility gives you enduring strength. And so then, right, the question, is my humility perceived as weakness? Does that cause others to take advantage of me? How do you balance the projecting the confidence that gets people to listen to you, right, or to follow you, with having the appropriate level of humility, right? Like it's still like a value, and one of this you wrote. And so the exercise that they suggest for the day is to demonstrate the strength of your humility by initiating or actively participating in a good cause. So I'm not sure that would have been my exercise of the day, but it is always a good thing to do. Right, but I think when I was thinking about it last night, I said to Will, what did I say? I said, how does my humility help move an agenda forward, right? How do I use my awareness of where I am in my process of my 49 days of my whatever, right? Baking myself up. How do I use that to show someone something positive, right? Instead of being the doormat, how do you use it to show an inner strength? An inner flexibility. It's sort of, humility made me think of like that, right? Like the reed bends, but the wood snaps. I can't think of the pasuk, right? That kind of thing. How do you use your humility to be bendy and not breakable? But you know, their exercise is good too. And so I think taking a step back, that what I took from this exercise and from thinking about both the sort of Rabbi Sachs like leadership piece and the Rabbi Riskin everyone can do it piece, is that when we compare these two models, that they're both really important. And we're only asked to be intentional about counting our days, I think, because counting our years is really overwhelming. But if we count our days, we may be able to count our years, right? And I think that's sort of Rabbi Riskin's point, is that if you take it seriously, counting Ba Omer will get to the La Omer long-term goal. And that we have to still keep our eye on that long-term goal, or there's like something lost in the smaller picture of the day-to-day counting. And that striving to have that big picture, not just for our own people, but for the AOM, for Ann Arbor, for Michigan, you know, diaspora Jewry, the world, like however we think about this is difficult. And it is hard, and it necessitates teamwork and forethought and like things that we don't always have agency over. And so it takes the purposefulness and the responsibility of good leadership to really hold a community to that. But by counting within the Omer, which we're like, you know, a little over halfway through, that period focuses us on preparing ourselves to live purposeful lives. And that if we set ourselves up for that purposeful life, that then it's easier to develop the longer view. And that by counting the Omer, we can be mindful of the days that fly by and also look at our bigger goals to ultimately create long-term visions. So even if the Yovel year feels less applicable when we're in Shul Shabbat, I think if we remember the echo of last week's Omer practice, that we can find a lot of meaning and value in counting both years and days. And I welcome thoughts and ideas and all of that.
I think this is really wonderful. I really appreciated your thoughts. I think it's, yeah, like a great sort of framework for thinking about time and goals. And I think I share your feeling that it's like really hard to plan very far in advance. Like I feel like I often see advice where they're like, oh, plan out where you want to be in 5 years. And I'm like, I can't even think 1 year, let alone 5. But I think this is like a nice framework for how to maybe do that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. When I was thinking and preparing, I thought when Will and I got engaged, we had an 8-year plan. I was like, 8 years, that's like forever. And now it's, you know, it's been even longer. It does both fly by and seem impossible.
Thank you. It was wonderful. It's important, not even just when you're counting the Omer, but how do you continue on throughout life to just pause, count, remember, think, plan. It's important all year.
Yes. Every year towards the end, I'm like, we should do something in that 2 minutes, Will, right? Like we took the 2 minutes to open the count and to find the bracha. Let's do something else then. Like, let's say something we're grateful for. But, you know, after
it disappears, right? And you forget, you stop.
It is really hard. And, you know, I don't know what it says about me, like if it's a strength of Orthodoxy or a weakness, that right when it's a bracha, I feel like obligated, but when it's not, even if it's super important, how quickly I let it go.
It's human nature.
Thank you.
We get busy and you do the next thing, you forget.
Yeah.
Even with it, when you talked about if you do something for 30 days, it becomes habit and you just do it. It's true of exercise, but then if you don't exercise for 30 more days, it's like you never exercised. Like we are just very adaptable.
And it goes so fast the other way. Like I used to do gymnastics and they would say, right, it takes 30 days to build the muscle and 3 days to lose it or whatever it was, right? Like,
And it's true. Yeah. Yeah. I feel it after winter when it's springtime, you get on your bicycle, you can't pedal. Like seriously, can't get up the hill.
yes.
So thank you. It's very insightful and thoughtful as always.
Thank you. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great end of your week. If you feel up to it and the weather holds up, I hope you'll come to the bonfire at Evan and Ariel Zoldan's. Tomorrow, I'll send out the address in the morning. No real agenda, just to celebrate Lag BaOmer all together. If you missed out on the gourmet s'mores because you either were not available or you were not a woman on Rosh Chodesh, now is your chance. We've gotten even better at them over time. So I hope.
Yeah, I did not RSVP. Can you add me to the list, whether permitted?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
definitely. Yes.
Thank
and
you so much.
Spread the word that, RSVPs were appreciated, but I've already bought way too many graham crackers. So everyone is
All
welcome.
right. Perfect. I'll come hungry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could you also
Take
add
care.
me, Abigail?
Yeah, great. I'd love to. Okay, wonderful. So I'll see hopefully some of you tomorrow. Otherwise, have a happy Lag BaOmer, and I'll see you on Shabbat or a good Shabbat.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.